In 1867, the United States paid $7.2 million for a piece of land that critics called a polar bear garden. Newspapers mocked it as Seward's Folly, an icebox. Nobody wanted it. Nobody understood it. That land turned out to hold more oil than almost anywhere else in North America. Gold that sparked one of the greatest stampedes in human history. And a strategic position so valuable it would help decide the outcome of World War II. This is the story of Alaska, the last frontier. Bought for pennies an acre and almost thrown away twice. Long before any flag was planted in Alaska's soil, people were already calling it home. Somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels dropped low enough to expose a land bridge connecting Siberia to Alaska. Scientists call it Berinia. Across this bridge came the ancestors of the peoples we now know as the Inupiat, Yupik, Aleut, Tlingit, Haida, and Athabascan nations. Dozens of distinct cultures, each adapted with remarkable precision to one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Inupiat mastered whaling in the Arctic North, developing skin boats called umiaks, capable of taking down bowhead whales, weighing up to 100 tons. The Tlingit and Haida in the southeast built a rich hierarchical society around cedar longhouses, totem poles, and an intricate potlatch economy. The Aleut, spread across the wind-battered Aleutian Islands, became some of the most skilled kayak hunters the world has ever seen. By the time Europeans arrived, an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 indigenous people were living across this land, and their descendants remain central to Alaska's identity today, making up roughly 15% of the state's population, the highest proportion of any state in the country. Europeans didn't reach Alaska until surprisingly late. In 1741, a Russian expedition led by Danish explorer Vitus Bering, yes, that's where the Bering Sea gets its name, sighted the Alaskan coastline. What followed wasn't colonization for land. It was colonization for fur. Sea otter pelts were worth staggering sums in China and Europe, and Russian fur traders, known as promyshlenniki, poured into the region. The human cost was severe. Russian traders forced Aleut hunters into brutal labor conditions, and disease, violence, and displacement devastated indigenous populations. Some estimates suggest the Aleut population dropped by as much as 80% within decades of contact. In 1799, the Russian-American company was chartered, essentially a corporate colonial government, and established its capital at Sitka. For nearly 70 years, Russia held a loose, thinly populated claim over Alaska. But by the 1860s, the sea otter population had been hunted to near collapse. The colony was expensive to defend, and Russia was still reeling from a costly defeat in the Crimean War. Russia had a decision to make. On March 30th, 1867, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward signed a treaty to purchase Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, about 2 cents an acre. The American public was not impressed. The press had a field day, calling it Seward's Icebox, Seward's Folly, and Wall Russia. Most Americans saw it as a frozen wasteland with no practical value, purchased on a whim. For the next 17 years, the U.S. government barely governed Alaska at all. It had no formal territorial status, no real infrastructure, and minimal federal presence. It was administered, at various points, by the Army, the Treasury Department, and the Navy, almost as an afterthought. That would change dramatically before the century was out. In 1896, gold was discovered along a tributary of the Klondike River, technically just across the border in Canada's Yukon. But Alaska's ports became the gateway for the stampede that followed. Roughly 100,000 prospectors set out for the gold fields between 1897 and 1898, and towns like Skagway and Dyea exploded overnight from nothing into chaotic boom towns. The journey was brutal. Climbing the Chilkoot Pass, prospectors were required by Canadian authorities to carry a full year's worth of supplies, nearly a ton of gear, on their backs in stages through snow and ice. Then, in 1899, gold was found directly on Alaskan soil near Nome, triggering a second rush. By 1902, another major strike near Fairbanks cemented Alaska's reputation as a land of opportunity. Dangerous, unpredictable, but potentially life-changing. The gold rushes did something the fur trade never had. They brought tens of thousands of permanent settlers, built real towns, and forced the U.S. government to take Alaska seriously. In 1912, Alaska was finally organized as an official U.S. territory. Most Americans don't realize that World War II was fought on U.S. soil, and that soil was Alaska. In June 1942, Japanese forces attacked the U.S. naval base at Dutch Harbor, and then invaded and occupied the islands of Attu and Kiska in the Aleutian chain. It was the only time since the War of 1812 that a foreign power occupied American territory. The Battle of Attu in May 1943 became one of the most brutal engagements of the Pacific War. Fought in freezing fog and treacherous terrain over 19 days, it ended with a nearly 99% Japanese casualty rate of a garrison of roughly 2,400 to 2,900 men. Only about 28 survived to be taken prisoner. Nearly 550 American soldiers were also killed, with over 1,000 more lost to frostbite and exposure. The war transformed Alaska almost overnight. The military built roads, airfields, and the Alaska Highway, a 1,500-mile route connecting Alaska to the rest of the continental U.S., built in just 8 months by U.S. Army engineers, including several regiments of African-American soldiers who worked in brutal, sub-zero conditions. By the war's end, Alaska had gone from a remote outpost to a strategically vital piece of American defense, and that new importance helped build the case for something bigger. Statehood had been debated for decades, but resistance was strong. Some in Congress worried Alaska's small population couldn't sustain itself economically. Others worried about its remoteness and vulnerability during the Cold War, given its proximity to the Soviet Union. But after years of lobbying by Alaskan leaders, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Alaska Statehood Act, and on January 3, 1959, Alaska officially became the 49th state of the United States, beating Hawaii to statehood by just a few months. Alaskans celebrated with bonfires, parades, and church bells ringing across the territory. For the first time, Alaska had full representation in Congress and the ability to govern its own resources. That last part, control over its own resources, was about to matter more than almost anyone could have predicted. In 1968, an enormous oil field was discovered at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope. At the time, the largest oil field ever found in North America. But there was a problem. How do you move oil from the Arctic Ocean coast to the rest of the country? The answer was the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, an 800-mile engineering marvel completed in 1977. Built to withstand earthquakes, permafrost, and temperatures that could plunge to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Oil transformed Alaska's economy almost overnight. In 1976, the state created the Alaska Permanent Fund, investing oil revenue for the benefit of residents. Since 1982, the fund has paid an annual dividend directly to every eligible Alaskan resident, literally putting oil money in citizens' pockets, a policy almost unique in the world. But prosperity came with cost. In 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez struck a reef in Prince William Sound, spilling an estimated 11 million gallons of crude oil and devastating one of the richest marine ecosystems in North America. It remains one of the most infamous environmental disasters in U.S. history, and its long shadow still shapes debates over Alaska's relationship with the oil industry today. Today, Alaska is a state of extremes and contradictions. It's the largest state in the U.S. by land area, more than twice the size of Texas, yet has one of the smallest populations, with fewer than 750,000 residents. It's a place where indigenous cultures, thousands of years old, exist, alongside oil executives, commercial fishermen, and a booming tourism industry built on cruise ships and the Northern Lights. It's a state that still, in many communities, can only be reached by boat or bush plane, and it remains deeply tied to the resource, oil, that transformed it from an overlooked purchase into one of the most economically important states in the country. From a forgotten folly to a strategic wartime frontier to a resource powerhouse, Alaska's history is really the story of a place the rest of the country kept underestimating, right up until it couldn't anymore. Alaska's story is still being written through climate change, reshaping its coastlines, through ongoing debates over drilling and conservation, and through indigenous communities fighting to preserve traditions older than the state itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Alaska's history, let me know in the comments which state or territory you want covered next. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover a new hidden corner of American history every week.